Hi, Stuart here. Today we're going to talk about using Redis as a shared state machine. In other words, a cache. And you can read about all the many other scenarios you can use Redis for up on their website, redis.io. It's open source. It's available on most clouds. And I keep finding like handy uses for it. It's like the Swiss Army knife of key value stores, but it can do so much more than that. It's very high performance. It's screamingly fast if it's set up the right way in the infrastructure. It's available platform as a service on most clouds, so that's extra convenient. And the cloud providers tend to offer HA and DR features and other great things that you might want out of your Redis, as opposed to having to DIY it yourself on top of virtual machines. So that is a wonderful and good thing. And I'm a C# developer, as many of you know, and so I sort of cast around for what would be a good API facade over Redis. And I hit upon the good folks at Service Stack, whose Redis client, in my opinion, is my favorite because it preserves the flavor of the syntax and the semantics of Redis and its capabilities, but it does it in a way that C# and other .NET developers can really get a handle on. So what I did is I took their great library and I wrote a little facade, a little helper over it to do something really simple. And that is getting and setting name value pairs in a shared state. And so it's a great way to get started and play with Redis. And we're using Redis out of a Docker container for our demo. So let's just get right to the demo and then look at some code. As always, we're going to start by making sure our Docker desktop is running. Go to our Visual Studio and we're going to open up our command line, which for me is the bash prompt, and we're going to start Redis running in our Docker container. You can see our Docker is up and running, and we've mapped the Redis port of 6379 to our localhost port of the same name. And since that's the port that Redis listens on, we're going to be able to have our code talk to the Redis running in the Docker container. So this is a little command line utility, and it generates 9 messages and writes them to the Redis cache. And so that's how that works. And that's not a terribly exciting demo, in fact. But what is interesting is this tiny little Redis client that I built on top of Redis Stack Exchange. So what I wanted to be able to do is spin up a new instance of a client and pass it my Redis configuration from which I could make a Redis connection string, and thence I could make Redis client on top of the Stack Exchange client. And then in my client, I have a simple set of key value that's string, and I also have a set of type T. So you can pass it any object that can be JSON serialized can be saved into Redis, but underneath the covers, we're using string set both times. And then we have the corresponding gets, and that's pretty much all she wrote on that. So in our little program that uses Redis, we are parsing the command line arguments and spinning up an instance of my little Redis worker. And if we go look in my Redis worker, you can see that it's just a simple little loop where I loop through the number of messages I want. I generate a random key value, and then I set, calling my Redis client, I set that key value pair, and I make sure that they basically match. So you can imagine that if you're using my little Redis facade over the top of a client, and you had previously been caching things in memory, that you could quite easily swap that out and cache things to Redis instead.